I was a little sick in the MTC, and I had taken NyQuil the night before, which is kind of a bad idea. I was out that night, and so I woke up late. Woke up with my travel buddy late, and so we had to scramble to get everything together. It wasn't too big of a deal, but we were a little sad because we wanted to we actually wanted to take a really warm shower for a long time before we actually left, because we had heard that there weren't going to be any warm showers anymore, and so we wanted to say goodbye. Anyway, so we got up. We were getting to the airport and everything, and got on the plane. It was great. I was really excited to see when we got into the terminal at Dallas. We had a layover in Dallas. When we got there, I was really excited to see the McDonald's arches. That was something I hadn't seen in a long time. The MTC food is great, but sometimes you miss a Big Mac every once in a while. So I got to chow down on one of those. And what I didn't realize was that once we had gotten on the plane from Dallas to El Salvador, they were going to serve a meal. And so I was already full from, my lunch and from my layover. And so, but I was just like, oh, hey, free meal on a plane. It was pretty cool. So I decided, I'd eat it again. And so I was decently full once we arrived in El Salvador. Of course, it was raining. We actually were getting there at the kind of end of the rainy season. And so we arrived there in September, so it was like that tail end. And so we, get off the plane, and people had told me like the humidity was gonna, hit you, and it was gonna be really humid, you're gonna be sweaty. And so I got off, we were in the terminal, and I was just like, it's a little humid, but not bad. I mean, they were just, being wimps or whatever, that was my thought process. And so, we got our bags, and I remember being incredibly nervous, because once we got to immigration, I was just like, these people, they aren't going to speak any English. I'm not very good at my Spanish. I was a little nervous, to talk to them. And so once we got up to the desk, we handed them our passports, and I just was like, I was at a loss for words. I didn't know what to say. And she just, she kind of looked at me and, just checking my picture and everything, and gave me a stamp. And I believe we had to pay some kind of transaction fee. And I think I remember her saying $10 in Spanish or something like that. And I barely caught it. I almost didn't catch it. And so I was just, scrambling. And, I was really relieved, to get past that, smooth sailing, immigration. And there was at the end of immigration, they had a random search like box that you had to go through, and it had a red light and a green light. And so it had a green light, you were fine. Once it got a red light, then they just randomly search you, And I was like, as I was standing in line, I was just like, I don't want to get a red light. Please don't get a red light. No red light. I was very nervous about that. And so I get up there, and I understood. I was surprised, because I understood what the security officer running the booth, he was just like, what group are you guys with? And I understood what he said, and I started getting really excited. I was just like, oh, look, here's my first experience. I'm going to share the gospel with this guy, that doesn't know who we are. And I couldn't, because, I didn't really know the words. And I was just like, okay, we are, I started, fumbling in Spanish to say it. But before I had realized it, I, had gotten the green light, and I was getting shuffled through. And then I was like, oh, I wish I would have gotten the red light. I would have been able to talk to him. Oh, hopefully talk to him. And so that was an interesting experience, getting off the plane. And we were supposed to go out the doors, and they were automatic doors. And so we were just walking out, and the automatic doors just opened, and there it was, just, the humidity. And I was just like, I knew exactly what they were talking about then. I was just, you were just hit with it. And then you just immediately started to sweat. And, we're all in our suits here, and I'm thrilled to be there. I'm really excited to be there, but I'm like sweating like a dog here. And so that was definitely interesting. Our mission president and his wife were there to welcome us and everything. So, we got all settled in, and I couldn't believe how hot it was. And so I was really excited, and I wanted to take a picture. So I got with my travel buddy, and we took a picture. And so I have a picture of that moment when I had just gotten off. I was really excited. You can just kind of see like the excitement in our faces, but also just we're all like wet, just drenched with sweat. And so that's one thing about El Salvador, is that you'll always be sweating. You'll constantly be sweating. The only time I really wasn't was maybe in the middle of the night, early in the morning. That's probably when you weren't sweating because you weren't really doing anything. So, but that was one of my favorite experiences, was actually getting here. So once we got settled in, we went to the mission home, and keep in mind, I'm pretty full from, my 2 meals. And we get to the mission home, and, lo and behold, there's this giant feast that, the mission president's wife has prepared for us. And so I'm just like, oh, this is great. So I get some food, and I sit down to eat, and I realize that I'm incredibly full. I've had enough. And I didn't want to be rude or anything, because in that culture, if you reject food for whatever reason, it's a little offensive. Like, they're very gracious, they'll give you food, and it's very kind of them. And so sorry, I have an itchy nose. Oh. And so that ideal is just like a commonality, just out of common courtesy. And so I was eating, I didn't know my mission president's wife very well, so I was just trying to be very gracious, and I was just thinking in my head, just like, I don't know how much more I can take. And so I started eating, and I finished the meal, and I was just, okay, I'm good. And then after the meal, the mission president's wife, she brought out what are called pupusas. Pupusas are a common dish in El Salvador. You'll get very used to them. You'll love them, which are basically these just, simply put, they're tortillas. And they make these tortillas a little thick, and they stuff pretty much whatever you want in there. The most common one is like, beans and cheese, or sometimes they put what's called chicharron in them, which is basically kind of like a seasoned pork, and they put in there. We could never eat that one because we couldn't eat pork, but I can get to that later. And then sometimes just cheese. Anyway, the mission president's wife had made some. She was originally from Guatemala, so she had learned to make them. And she brought them out, and I really wanted to try them. I really did. But I was like, if I eat any more, something bad might happen. So, I kept from eating those. And I managed, everything was great. And so that was definitely a fun experience, because, I couldn't focus on anything, because I was just trying to just shovel down this food without, having any complaints or any problems or anything like that. So that was kind of a funny experience that I had my first few hours of the mission. So, yeah. Well, Santa Ana it's a fairly decent sized city. I mean, they didn't have any like skyscrapers or anything like that. It's just very large. And my first area was kind of just on the outskirts of the city. And most of my mission consisted of just a really big neighborhood built by the government. And it's really cheap housing for people, that live there. And it's really interesting because it's all built the same. Like, we would often get lost because just all of the buildings looked the same usually. And, there were a few landmarkers that differentiated it. And so that was definitely interesting, and just the housing, on how everything looked the same. And you go into one house and it's exactly the same as the other one. And so that was definitely interesting, just to see just like the living conditions, at least in Santa Ana. Parts of it was that, I guess you could say the lower middle class, maybe to lower class, would live in these government housing, and it was fairly cheap for them, as far as I understand, and very small, very cramped living conditions. You would be teaching someone, and quite possibly like be touching their knees, while you're sitting down on their couches that they have in their small room. And so that was definitely interesting to see, like, how people lived that way. And in as far as, my mission goes, it was different, or that area goes, it was different because if you get into the center of the city is where more of the wealth is. And so you'd get to some really big houses. And when you got to those big houses, all of them had a really big wall around them. That was a really common thing, was just to see just a big wall with a big, slidable door that you can, put cars in and everything like that. And there was one part of my mission that was, complete opposite. That was very interesting. Across the street were those really big houses, because it was kind of on, the suburbs of the city. And I really enjoyed, going and seeing those houses, because I thought that they were, really cool and everything like that. They were really difficult to contact, because most of the time they had, really big jobs, either in San Salvador or Santa Ana. They had office jobs, kind of like white collar type of jobs. And you would often go up and they would have a intercom system. You'd push the buzzer and they would often have a camera. And so they'd see who you are. They'd ask you who you are. You definitely say, we're the missionaries and we would like to share a message. And so that was kind of difficult, because there wasn't that face-to-face interaction, because you had this big wall between. And so that was difficult. But I always had a lot of fun doing it, because you got to see these beautiful, well, at least these beautiful walls that had, the houses behind them. Every once in a while there'd be one that would be open, and so you'd be able to see in it. And even though those people, generally they might have not been as interested when, just as far as, cold contacting goes, they were just very kind. They would always just say, oh no, thank you. We don't really have time. Or they were always very kind. And that was one thing that really stood out to me in El Salvador, is just a very kind culture. And they would always they wouldn't want to be confrontational with you. Which was definitely interesting to see. So that was like, as far as the living conditions go, in El Salvador, well, at least in Santa Ana, which was the city, the transportation is, I would say, 95% bus. Everyone got around using the bus system. So there were buses everywhere. That's what the missionaries use. We had buses, so no like bikes or anything. And they were fairly cheap. A quarter gives you a ride within the city, or from the mission office to where our area was. So fairly cheap. Sometimes maybe it might get to like 50 cents if it was farther than that. So that was something that definitely was interesting. Was cheap bus fares. And since everyone used the buses, you definitely see every different type of people on the bus. And I really liked being on the buses, because you'd get to see and also contact people on the bus. We would often, as missionaries, sit separately so we could sit next to someone on the bus. No one can run away when they're on the bus, right? And so that was something that we did. And we just, chat. Sometimes we would just chat with them, like get to know who they were. Their life, very interesting. A lot of times people would bring on, because the work there involves, the people that use the buses, it involves a lot of, selling things that they make or trade with. Sometimes people would make their own baskets or something like that and sell those. But I think the more common thing was they would get a hold of clothing, or other items like that, and then they would sell them in the streets. Most of it was clothing. Sometimes it was food, a lot of fruit, stuff like that. So that's what that consisted of. They would just go and maybe sell in the street. Maybe they had a place where they'd rent out, or something like that. That was interesting to see. And so they'd always bring their stuff on with them, to go wherever. And so like these big ginormous bags, like this little old lady with like a really big bag that they would carry on their head. That was a common thing of the women of El Salvador. They would just carry immense loads of whatever on their heads. And it was surprising for us as missionaries, and that they would be able to do that. And so that was definitely an interesting experience, just to see the people, carrying that stuff. And so that's what it consisted of. They would, go out and sell something, or actually it was pretty common to have a store in your actual home, where they would have anything from chips, just potato chips, to shampoo. And it was just like a little store that they would have whenever someone needed something really quick, they just go to the little corner store. They called them tienditas, which means little store, and you could just get anything. And they were everywhere, from block to block. That was something that was really cool, because every once in a while the missionaries are just, I want a snack, and so you just walk right up to to that store, pay them 10 cents for a bag of chips, and that was something that was interesting there. And so that probably is like the work life, I would say, of a lot of people in El Salvador. Well, at least in Santa Ana, which is kind of a bigger city. And that was the main thing, was just trade, selling things and stuff like that. And I was amazed. A lot of people do sell things on the bus. They would bring whatever thing that they could with them, and they just kind of walk along and just offer to sell something, and then just hop off. If they sold something or not, they'd hop off and get onto the next bus. That was something that people exclusively did, whether it was like candy, fruit, something like that would be very common. Some people, I remember once someone was selling one of those spirographs, where you draw and you can make cool pictures. And so just any sort of knick-knack or whatever you can think of, especially when the buses would drive through the actual market. And they had a big market set up where everyone would be selling everything, meats, fruits, things like that. And when they'd be driving through the market, which was usually by the bus terminal, so you'd be able to drive right through it. And they would always just, tons of people, 10, 20 people would just come on and just start shouting, what they were selling. And so it got really loud, and just shouting what they were selling. Sometimes you had to look and see what you wanted. Maybe sometimes, and they would, you just make that transaction and be on your way. And so that was definitely interesting to see, just like people selling all these things. And sometimes you didn't even need to get off the bus to go to the market, because it would come to you. And so that was definitely fun to see. And just like in that part, excuse me, in that part of the city. So Santa Ana was my second area, but my first area was a small town called Nahuizalco, which was a small town located in the state of Sonsonate. And that was definitely very different from the city, because it was very rural. Most people did either farming, or they would often harvest coffee. Coffee is a really big thing in El Salvador, and a lot of people would go and just harvest coffee for a few months out of the year, probably from late December to February. And that's what a lot of them would do. And very humble conditions a lot of the time. That was one big contrast that I saw, was that when I arrived, this was my first area, and so a lot of people would be living in, if they weren't living in the main part of the city or the town, they would be, of course, living on the outsides, and most of them would be living in just the corrugated, steel tin roofs, and they'd build their own little huts out of just the corrugated steel. And they'd, find old, trees and, put them as supports, everything like that. So very, very humble conditions, I would say. And just with a regular dirt floor, that's a common thing, in El Salvador, just those huts. And, very kind people, as far as just like, of course you can tell that just their living conditions are just very humble. And I think a lot of people were more willing to listen to the missionaries, just because they were just living in such humble conditions, and they were so receptive to anything anybody had to say, really. And they would often just they would always be home, or at least one family member would be home because they didn't want anything to get stolen, because it's fairly easy to get into those houses. And so that was a plus for us missionaries. We'd often find people at home and everything like that. And that was one thing. They'd always invite us in, and they'd offer us something to drink or something like that. And so that was a great experience. It was very different, and people would often make their own what they would call colonias, which would just be streets. Sometimes they'd make their own path somewhere, and it was just over time, people would just build along their little huts along these streets. There was one particular, I guess you could say, like little type of canyon area that they had made, where it was built by the people. They build their own stairs and out of the dirt, and sometimes they get concrete every once in a while, but you'd hike up there and you just find little huts along the way, and you just keep going. And we taught actually a family that was up there, and they had a hut, they had a store, just one of those little stores, and so they had that revenue that way. But they also would go to the capital to sell, I think it was mirrors, and that was one thing they'd build and sell those mirrors. And so that was really cool to see, just like nestled in everywhere were some people living, like in different areas. And just to see that living condition, first of all, it surprised me that people could live that way, and also was a very humbling experience, like just to see I grew up with a flush toilet and everything like that, whereas there that's not all that common. They would dig their own latrines and everything like that, but at the same time they could still be very gracious and very kind, especially towards an American like me. I kind of stick out like a sore thumb because I definitely have my white skin and everything, but and they, based upon television and everything, what they see, the living conditions are a lot different. And so even though they can see where I've come from, they would often offer me what would be their meal for the day. And so at first I was uncomfortable receiving that, but through time I kind of realized that it was kind of an honor for them. It was something that they really enjoyed doing, especially since if they were members of the church, they would really be honored to be able to give the missionaries a meal. And that was very humbling, and that made me feel very loved. And also they knew that they would receive the blessings for feeding the missionaries. So that kind of faith as well as kindness was very impactful towards me, and I learned to greatly receive that food, and made sure you eat all of it and everything like that. That's something that they're very satisfied to see, because if you eat every last bite of it, they see that as something that, oh, you know what, they loved it, and they're very gracious for it. And so that I have to say that was like the difference. That was one big difference from living from there to the city. It's different in that sense. A lot of people in this small town, they would make most of their items to sell. There was one part of this small town that was far off, and it was dirt road. We actually had a small branch over there that met in a meeting house with just a dirt floor and everything like that. And they would everyone there made baskets. I think it was just because they had really easy access to the bamboo that was there, and they would just all the time, we would be walking down the street and everybody would just be, with their knives, making these little strands from the long bamboo sticks to weave baskets. And they would get really quick at it. They'd just be really fast. A lot of times we'd be talking to them, and they'd just be going, maybe half paying attention, I don't know. But some people, they'd be really listening to us. They'd be able to multitask very well. I mean, sure, they've got this thing down. They'd just be whittling away with their machetes at weaving these baskets, these pretty baskets that were actually pretty durable. They held up pretty well. I had one of the members over there, I had them make just a small travel size basket, like kind of just like a souvenir basket. A lot of detail. I was very impressed, and it has held up pretty well. It holds. I mean, I don't really use it for anything, but I think it got smashed in my luggage or whatever. But that was something that's interesting, and as a lot of the times they would make their own merchandise to sell because there really wasn't anything else, and so a lot of people would be doing that to sell in the larger cities or something like that. They would often travel to the larger cities to sell them because it wasn't that common, because everyone there would be making these baskets to sell, and so they would have to spread out to go find people that would be willing to buy them. So yeah, the mission there, from what I understand, the history of the mission work in El Salvador, they began sending missionaries down there, I believe, in the late 40s or the early 50s, and they just sent a few down there, and after like a good reception, they started sending some more, but they had to halt for a while, withdraw the missionaries, I believe, for some time. And I think it was mostly due because of recently they had a civil war, and it was a war between the government and just the organized crime in El Salvador, the gangs and everything like that. And that was, I think that was really, it was something that was very just impactful on the government as well as the culture and people of El Salvador, in that it was just kind of ripping itself apart, really. And the Civil War, I'm not exactly sure when it started. I want to say it's like the 70s, the late 70s, but I'm not sure on that. But it did end in 1991. The Civil War was ended when the government made kind of like what they called a peace treaty with the gangs, in that they made some kind of agreement. And so from that, you can kind of, guess that, there's a huge influence of gangs in El Salvador, and that's definitely something that we can talk about. And so once that, was kind of all settled, I knew that there were missionaries at a certain time during the war. So that work was definitely happening. And but I think between the time of the 50s to now, the church has grown tremendously in El Salvador. The people have been just very receptive, and I think for a long time they've just kind of been looking for something, because for years the church has been predominantly the Catholic Church, and I think for a while the government has placed exclusivity to the Catholic Church, until recently, when they kind of let freedom of religion down there. And so once they did that, a lot of people that I guess weren't all that inclined to go to be Catholic, they were looking for other things, which I think is which is a real blessing, because a lot of people were looking for something else. And I think once that happened, the evangelical church definitely took its hold down in El Salvador. There are a lot of different evangelical, sects and everything like that down there, which is definitely interesting to see. It's interesting to see the different churches that are available for people. They have the Assemblies of God. They have something called the Friends of Israel. All of these churches, which of course preach from the Bible and everything like that, but very different than probably the churches that we might encounter and hear, or at least just in the United States maybe. But the evangelical church is really huge on their hymns and shouting and chanting. And so whenever there's a meeting of the evangelical church, you definitely know it, because there's a lot of just a lot of with clapping. And so and they love to broadcast that. They put their speakers out in front of the doors, and they have their hymns, and they sing. And so it definitely attracts a lot of attention. That was something that was very interesting to me. I was just like, oh wow, it's definitely different than the Mormon church or our church. They definitely are very loud and open, whereas we have kind of quieter, more reverent meetings. And so that was a big change. And as far as the more along the lines of like the missionary work, since a lot of people are searching for the truth, there's church has, like I said, it's been growing a lot, and the stakes, as far as I understand, there's the East and the West mission, and the East mission, they tend, I think they have more of the industrialized part of the mission, as far as from what I've been told from some friends that have gone over there, and that being, they have, I think it's a little bit more difficult because people I think they have a little bit more money over there, and I'm not speaking from experience, and that's just what I have kind of deduced, is that they since they do that, they're a little bit more set in their ways kind of thing. And I think the church has grown there, but I don't think it has grown as much as it has in the West Mission, and I think that might have been one of the reasons why, actually a year into my mission, we gave 2 of the states closest to them to the other mission. So we changed our boundaries. We shortened our boundaries to just the states of Santa Ana, Ahuachapan, and Sonsonate, just those 3 states. And so that was one reason, and I think it was just because of the number of stakes that were in the western part of El Salvador. That was something that I was very impressed about too, was just how many stakes there were. There were quite a bit. I wasn't really expecting that much. I honestly, from what people had told me, I was expecting maybe like some huts somewhere that the church was renting out, as far as like big meeting houses, wards, and stuff like that. But the church has a really big influence in El Salvador. I think everyone has seen our church buildings because they're very distinct, because they have the spire and everything, and everyone knows who at least the Mormons are, and so I think that's definitely something that's very good. There's a really big influence in the church, and that's like basically the basis of the church there, and as far as the mission goes, it kind of like follows along with it. I think it's been steadily growing as well. So El Salvador, is kind of notorious for its crime levels. They have a lot of gangs. Mostly they have two large gangs, which is the MS-13 and the MS-18. They started in Los Angeles by El Salvadorians, but they, some of them, got deported to El Salvador, and so that's where it kind of, I think, initially started. And so the gangs have a really big influence in El Salvador. Since knowing that, like when I was starting out, I was very, to tell you the truth, I was honestly excited. I wanted like to see how that worked. I mean, I think that was kind of naive and stupid of me, but I wanted just to see like just the different like gangs and how they kind of interacted. Like I thought that was kind of fascinating. And one thing about like in relation like to the gangs with like the missionaries, my entire time on my mission, I never felt like I was in danger. And I think the Lord had a really big hand, in that. But that's one thing. And I think it's because even though the gangs can be very pervasive in a community, very perhaps threatening, they definitely respect the religious side of the community. And I think especially the missionaries, oftentimes we would have our uniform and we would be required to wear our white shirt and name tag everywhere. Even though we were doing some kind of maybe service activity or something like that, we would often wear that and then change into our clothes, because it was kind of a protection for us, because the gangs would see that they'd be like, oh, those are missionaries, they are coming around preaching the word of God, and so they wouldn't harm us or anything like that. And so that was one thing that I thought was kind of impressive. I mean, it's kind of ironic that a gang would want, the help from God on their side, but that's just like how the culture is there. They always want God to help them out. They're very God-fearing people. And so that was one thing that was really interesting. I was most of the time oblivious to perhaps the dangers that might have been around me. And so that was something that was interesting to see, and the gangs themselves having their influence in whatever city that they were in. I remember one of my areas, they had the MS-13 and the MS-18 in the same city, but were divided by a road. And we actually went to work with one of the members that was there, and he dressed up with us, and he mentioned to us, he's like, elders, normally I wouldn't be able to come to this area of town, and we were just, really, why not? And he mentioned to us, he's just because of the different gang, because he lived in the area of the other gang, he couldn't go into that. It was very dangerous for him to go into the opposite area. And I was like, well, do we need to go back? Are you in danger? And he says, no, because I'm with you guys dressed in, a white shirt and a tie. And so that was something that was kind of eye-opening to me, that even though the youth, particularly I think the boys, were, they had to be very careful of where they went, just because of, that. And I think they knew pretty well, the gang kind of established it very well of like how that played a part, but he had to be very careful as to where he could go. And so that was something that I didn't realize, and something that was very interesting to me. And I definitely saw that, once he mentioned it to me, I saw that the people were very careful of where they could go, where they couldn't go. And so that was definitely interesting. Another thing was just how a lot of the people, in order to stay safe, oftentimes once the sun went down, they would go into their houses, which, is very, it's a smart thing to do. And so it made it a little difficult, but for us to, be out there until 9 o'clock in the evening, we would often be out there, and there would be a few people out in the street, but most of the time everyone would be indoors, because that's when it would be safe. And for us as missionaries, we would just walk around. We would often find people at home. That's when we'd often have our appointments, would be in the evening, because that's when people would, of course, be home. And so, but it was interesting to see just the streets would be just empty, like very different from the daytime. And I think it was mostly due to, the violence. And even though if there was an area that really didn't have all that much violence, I think it was just a custom, like they'd been doing it for so long. It was just a custom that they had. And so that was also interesting to see, just that way to live. And it's not like they were living in fear. I wouldn't say that at all. They just had to be careful, just because it was just different circumstances. There is a police presence there, but I think ever since the El Salvador Civil War, the police presence has definitely, they've definitely mellowed out a lot on their police, just because of the gangs, since the police has backed off a little bit, and the gangs have as well. So it's just kind of like at this standstill, this peace treaty. And so the police would be there. I mean, I remember once they stopped me and asked me for my papers. It was just like a formality, they definitely did that, and they just usually patrol the towns. And so that was one interesting thing as well, just the police presence. I think it was there for just to let people know that, they're there. And so there's just that sense of security. So that was pretty much like what the gang influence is there. And we as missionaries were not allowed to speak to gang members. That's just one thing that they tell us not to do, just because it's, for obvious reasons, you can't really get involved. And I do remember one time we were speaking with someone, we found out that they were part of a gang, which I think is a common thing, and we didn't know it at the time, but when we were talking with him, he just started talking. He just said that he had been through a rough life and things like that, and we were speaking with him and his family. Really a really decent person. I thought he was just very kind, and he was very respectful towards us, especially since we were missionaries. And so I guess that was one interesting thing would be to see. I think a lot of people are recruited into the gangs because they, don't necessarily have another choice. They kind of have to do it. And so that was another thing that was like really, really sad about that, was that a lot of the times they would be coerced into joining the gang. It was just kind of like a all or nothing deal would be to join those gangs. But overall, I think it was not as, if you do those things, particularly if the people of El Salvador would just follow those things, be careful of where to go, and not interfere with the gangs, I think, then they'd be fine. They'd go about their daily lives. I don't think it inhibited anyway their lives at all. So that's like basically what encompasses what my experience was of just the gangs in El Salvador. And even though they're there, and it's a reality there, I don't think it's something that needs to be all that worried about. The missionaries, like, we go everywhere and we have that protection, and so yeah. So about the food in El Salvador, it mainly consists of almost every meal of beans and rice, usually. And if not beans, or if not rice, then definitely beans. And so, get used to that. That's definitely like something that you will eat a lot of. And I didn't have any problem with beans and rice before, but it grew on me. It definitely did. I enjoyed it a lot. And the food there it's a little bit different. There are some dishes that are really common to El Salvador. I mentioned the pupusas, and that was one thing. Well, I guess I should probably first mention that the culture in El Salvador is, in contrast to our culture, we have breakfast and lunch, and usually dinner is I guess you could say, the big meal. I guess it's a little more, larger. Sometimes it's more fancy or something like that. Well, in El Salvador, the big thing is lunch. Lunch is usually their fancy meal, where they usually have more food or meats, stuff like that. And whereas dinner is kind of more like along the lines of breakfast. So you have breakfast, and then they have like the dinner, which are fairly closely related as far as types of food go. And so oftentimes one of my favorite breakfast foods to eat would be plátanos fritos, which are fried plantains. And I think that's a common thing in Central America. We would often they'd just be plantains. If you don't know, plantains are just like in the banana family, but they're a lot larger and pretty sweet. And they would fry them up and serve them with beans. Usually it's they usually put beans in a blender for a moment, so they're kind of like liquefied a little bit, but still, so they're like a little runny. And then with cream, that was a very common thing. And sometimes with maybe like a poached egg or something like that. And I have to say that was my favorite breakfast meal, right next to the pupusas. Were my favorite breakfast meal, and I'll get to the pupusas. But this meal was really great. And one thing about El Salvador also is that there is always something accommodating the meal. And when I say that, I mean it's either bread or tortillas. That's one thing that's interesting. And the tortillas there are about this big around, and they're pretty thick. They're thick tortillas, and usually they're used. You eat them along with the meal, and you use it to scoop up the rice into your utensils, or to sop up any food or anything like that. That's a very common thing. And if there aren't tortillas, usually a lot of people won't eat. It's very interesting. It's just and the tortillas, where are they? Or the bread. I usually like to have bread with this specific meal of the plantains. And so you'd have the bread in one hand, you'd have your fork in the other, and you'd use it to help scoop up beans or rice or whatever onto your fork, and then you'd sop up some of the beans and eat it. And that was my favorite. I love that meal. I'd often have that for breakfast and for for dinner. I thought that was great. And let's see, another meal. Well, I should definitely mention the pupusas, and that was very common. That was more common for breakfast and dinner. Usually lunch, a lot of the pupuserias is what they call them, the pupusa stores, they would close during lunchtime, because that was a weird thing to have pupusas at lunchtime, because it was seen as like a more casual type of meal. And they're basically these stuffed tortillas, filled with the beans and everything like that. I mentioned those. And you can put, my favorite, what they did, they mixed up this chicken, and they put, I don't know exactly what they put in there, but they put other types of vegetables maybe in there, and they'd stuff them and, make the pupusas, fry them up, and you would eat them. You'd eat them with your hands, with your fingers, and you'd have to cover them with this salsa, and you just go at it with your fingers. And if you were to eat a pupusa with a fork and knife, everyone would look at you like you were crazy. And so that was interesting. That was fun. Just eating, these pupusas with your hands. And you would just eat. Some people, I know some missionaries, I think the common thing to eat pupusas, I think they would eat around maybe 4. 4 is a decent number to fill you up, but there were some missionaries that could eat, 8 to 10. Which was, I never got to that number. I was, I couldn't make that. But that was one common thing, and you just eat them. And I often, you just get kind of like wrinkly fingers. At least I would, because that would happen to me a lot. I'd be licking my fingers a lot and everything. And so that was definitely a fun thing to eat. Were the pupusas, and they're delicious. A lot of people make them, and so you can definitely try out different types, different kinds. I recommend that you just try out everything and just see what you like. But the pupusas there are really good. It's something that you would enjoy. And as far as lunch goes, we actually would pay usually one of the members, and it's a very common thing, and the members would help out. We would just pay the members like a certain amount every week, and they would buy and cook your lunch for you. So we would do that, and they would often, a very common food is just chicken with beans and rice. That was very common, whether it be just fried or just cooked chicken just on the skillet or whatever. And I would eat chicken all the time, and tastes great. It really does. I'm actually not that much of a picky eater, and so I would eat a lot of that. And I guess there was one time maybe when I got tired of it, I was just like, oh, chicken again, but it was still delicious, and that was a good meal to eat, would be the chicken with the rice and beans. So get used to that. That's very common. And one meal that I really didn't like, I'm not a picky eater. I mean, I guess I would eat it, but I didn't like it, was that they would have fried fish. And I'm kind of particular on fish as far as, my taste goes, but this is a little different in that they would get the entire fish, and they would, take out, just like the major organs, but they would get the entire fish, and they would fry the entire fish, and then they would slap it on your plate with some rice, and you just see just like this fish that had been fried, and you just be looking at it. It still had the outer skin on it and everything, and that was something that I didn't particularly love. And out of courtesy, I would of course eat it, and somehow once it came up that I didn't like the fish, and one of the person that was our cook, she would make it every once in a while, and she looked at me and she was like, well, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, I don't know, I didn't want to hurt your feelings or anything. And she's like, oh, it's not my money, it's not any waste to me, I don't care. And so I was just like, oh, okay. So I learned that was something that I learned, but it would be interesting, because you'd open it up and start eating the fish, and they would leave some organs in there. I remember I wanted to try it. I got the eyeball out of the fish, and I tried the eyeball, and it wasn't all that great, but it's definitely something that I recommend. Something that's new and different. I recommend that you try just whatever, even though it might seem disgusting. Would be just to just try it. And another dish that I didn't like was liver. I mean, it's not exclusive to El Salvador, but I had first tried it when I was there. Would be liver, and I had a hard time swallowing that one. It was just your basic cow liver, and so I guess that's not all that unique. But those were the only ones that I didn't really like. But everything else I really enjoyed. I thought were really good, and those were, I guess, the general meals. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people would sell stuff in the streets, and oftentimes it would include food, like different types of food, maybe snack foods. And some snack foods, one of my favorite was what's called the yuca root. And they would fry it. It's a root. Basically, it's very close to the potato, I think. And they would chop it up, and they would fry it. So like these little pieces. Usually they're about that round, and they would fry them up, and then they would serve them with the salsa. And usually, if you bought yuca on the streets, they would put it in a bag for you and tie the top of the bag. They pour the salsa in with the fried yuca, and they tie the top of the bag. And usually, you just bite off the end, like the corner end of one of the bags, and you just eat it straight from the bag, like kind of like squeeze it out, kind of a little bit like toothpaste. It sounds kind of gross, but it's actually really good, and because it just tastes like, I guess the closest thing would be like fried potatoes with just kind of like a tomato sauce with some spices, and it was delicious. Like, we would get it all the time, just be chowing down. Like, if you got hungry maybe a little bit while you were out there, you could definitely eat that. That was really good. That was something that was really delicious that I like to eat. They also would get the same. They would get the plantains, and they would slice them down the just long ways like this, and they would fry them. So they'd turn into like chips, plantain chips. I think that's pretty common. And they would serve them with what they called chile. And I was thinking, when I first saw it, it's like really red sauce, and they pour it on there. And I was thinking it was going to be really, really spicy. But Salvadoreños, they don't like spicy foods at all. Like, it's something that it's just not common. Like, I would rarely, if at all, come across anything really spicy. So that's like kind of like how their taste. They usually prefer very sour. So like they would always get lime, and especially with these plantain chips, they'd get that sauce. They'd get the chile sauce, and then they put lime, and they'd squeeze some limes in there, and you'd kind of like mix it around. It's still in the bag, the plastic bag, and then you could munch on those. Those were very delicious. Those were something that I really enjoyed. Another fruit that was one of my favorites was that I miss very much was what they call talpas. And they're these little green, they look like grapes, but they have like a thicker shell around them. It's just these little green fruits, and you can usually, like, just to open it, you just kind of like bite, and it like breaks it, and you can pop it open. And inside is just like this, just a fruit, and you can pop that into your mouth. And you just kind of gnaw on it around like the seed. And so the seed's fairly big, and so you can just like kind of suck on it and everything like that and just spit out the seed. They were very sweet usually. Those were very delicious. I loved just to chow on those, would be just those talpas. And it was interesting because in, let's see, I believe in Santa Ana, I don't know if I might have those mixed up, but in Santa Ana they would call them talpas. And in Sonsonate, they would call them mamones. And so, and it just interesting to see just like the difference in what they call them. Like, even though they were so close, they'd call that, because like I would say, oh, I'd want, like if I was in Sonsonate, I'd be like, oh, I want some talpas. And they'd be like, what? Don't you mean mamones? And oh yeah, mamones, yeah, So that was interesting. And they're a delicious fruit. And they also had what were called lichas, which were a little bit bigger, same basic idea, a little bit bigger, but they had like these long, I guess you could say, spikes. I mean, they weren't sharp, but just like these spikes growing out of them. They were red, and you could open them the same way and pop them open. And these, I think, were really common. Like, they tasted a lot like coconut. They'd have the same seed and everything like that, but you can pop them in your mouth and they taste a lot like just coconut. Like if you were to scoop, a coconut, some of the coconut meat or whatever, and eat that. And those were really good. Not as common, I don't think, but those were delicious. And speaking of the coconuts, there were coconuts all over the place. Really delicious coconuts. Oftentimes you could just buy a coconut, and they would just get their machete and they'd chop it open, make a little opening for you, and then you could just drink right from the coconut. And that was good. My favorite was when it was chilled, when they were kind of cool. They were cold, and they would often be cold straight from the coconut, and you can just drink the coconut milk. And once you were done drinking it, sometimes they would chop it in half for you, and then you could just scoop out with a spoon. You can scoop out the actual fruit from it and eat it. And at first I didn't particularly love it. I was like, it didn't really have any flavor, but every once in a while they sometimes would put a little bit of sugar in there to sweeten it. But it was really good, and it was very satisfying. That was one thing. Just they had coconuts all over the place, and you can definitely tell because they would just bring truckloads of just full of coconuts, and you can eat those all the time. They were always available. People would sell them a lot, and so those were, I think, some major foods of El Salvador that I particularly remember. I really enjoyed. Just tons of different fruit. I mean, there are some other fruits that I could go on for a long time about, like just different types of fruit, but you come across something, you can definitely give it a shot and see if you like it. But usually the fruit in general, I think, was sweeter. Like, I mean, they had, of course they had like watermelon and things like that. And you just bite into it and it'd be very sweet. And I think it's just because, it was very fertile, easy to grow there, and just a lot sweeter. When I came back here, I was a little disappointed. I bit into a banana. It wasn't as sweet, it was a little disappointing, but that was one thing. It was a very sweet fruit that they had down there that I particularly enjoyed, was just like how sweet it was. One thing that was really common though, or actually I should say that wasn't common, was apples. And so apples kind of grow in cooler climates, and if you wanted to buy some at the supermarket, they'd be actually pretty pricey because they were difficult, to bring in and stuff like that. And so I thought that was interesting. Like, people would, they'd be asking me, they'd say, so do apples grow where you're from? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I actually grew up having an apple tree in my backyard. And they just, wow, they'd be very impressed. They'd want apples, and apples were a rare thing to come by. Just kind of like how, those kind of tropical fruits are not as common here. And so that was definitely interesting, and just to see just apples. And they mostly grew kind of in the higher mountains, usually in Guatemala. And so that was one cool thing. And I did miss apples. I mean, I had one every once in a while, but those were difficult to come by. So yeah, but that's the food of El Salvador. I mean, you might come across some other things that were a little bit different. I guess I should definitely mention one of my favorite dessert type foods. This was really delicious. And in El Salvador, it's very common to fry things. You eat a lot of fried foods in El Salvador, so you can definitely get used to that. They really enjoy frying stuff, and they have what's called empanadas, and that's a fairly common thing in Latin American culture, I think, are empanadas. And I think they vary across different countries, but the empanadas in El Salvador were fairly small, and what they would do would be they would mash up plantains, and they'd mash up and they make like this kind of like dough out of it, kind of, not really a dough, but this kind of like paste, I guess you could say. And then they would separately they would make kind of like a vanilla. Usually it was vanilla cream with a little bit of cinnamon, and they'd get actual cinnamon sticks and stick them in there and mix them in. So they'd make that separately, and so they would get the plantain paste kind of stuff. And, they use their hands. They use their hands the same way they would make pupusas. So they, dig a hole in it, make it a little flat, dig a hole in it, and then they'd scoop up a spoonful of this and plop it in and then seal it up and make it into like this little like ball, this little nugget thing, and then just fry it. And then they'd put sugar on it, and then you'd eat it, and it was very delicious biting into that. You taste the banana or the plantain, and then you taste this the vanilla. They just called it cream, but it was almost like a little bit like pudding, I would say, like vanilla pudding, and then there'd be like little bits of cinnamon in there. Very delicious. One of my favorite desserts. I'd get that all the time, and so that'd be delicious. That's one of the desserts there. So I guess that's like the food of El Salvador. That's what you can expect. As far as their taste goes, the taste, they like sour, but they also like bitter tasting foods. And I say that because of the fruit sometimes, and especially mangoes. Mangoes are there's tons of mangoes there, and I can get to the mangoes, but usually they would get, when the mangoes are early in season, when they're still green, they're fairly small, and they're just green, and they'd pick these mangoes and slice them in half, remove the seed, and you just eat them. They'd eat them usually with salt or with this chile sauce, and maybe sometimes with lime. And when I first saw that, I was weirded out, because why would you want to eat, some green fruit that normally, when it's ripe, it tastes, really sweet and delicious. And so I tried some, and I guess I have the same, like tastes as the people from El Salvador. I really like, sour, sometimes bitter foods, and it's very good. Just this green mango, and you just eat it with salt or with just this chili sauce, and I would get that all the time because it tasted so good. I was very surprised, and I would get that a lot. That would be one of my favorite things, would be green mangoes, because you'd have to wait, for the season for green mangoes, and then they'd be everywhere. Everyone would be you'd be able to buy, a bag for 25 cents and have it. And so that was one thing that was really delicious, was the green mangoes with the lime. Those were delicious. And talking about mangoes, they also were very delicious ripe, of course. And usually in El Salvador, being a Central America, a pretty tropical climate, there would be many different types of fruits. Some that I've heard of and some that I hadn't. And of course, the most common one would be mangoes. And the thing about the fruit trees there is that they just grow like randomly. You throw a seed off on the side of the road, and a mango tree will grow. Which was very cool, because sometimes there'd be so many mangoes that they would fall from the trees and no one would pick them up because there'd be so many, and they just kind of like sit. So like you definitely knew that you were coming up to a mango tree if you just saw like all these mangoes on the ground everywhere, and some of them were rotting and stuff, so it was kind of gross, but just mangoes everywhere. And that was one fun thing, as missionaries, like if you were kind of off where no one was really selling anything or something like that, you'd just be like, I want a mango. So you'd get a rock and toss it, and have some mangoes fall, and you can peel it and chow down on a delicious mango. And they had different types. Some of them, they had some mangoes that were bigger, and the bigger ones, they were less sweet usually. They were still pretty sweet, but they were a little bit, I would say, more, I don't know if bitter is the right word, but they were just, I guess, less sweet. And you could definitely eat those. And some of them, and then they had smaller ones, which were maybe about this big, and and they were very sweet. And then there were some in between. So you could definitely, like, there was a different variety. I had no idea there were different types of mangoes. So that was definitely something that was cool, is that the different types of mangoes that you could eat and enjoy, like lots of mangoes all the time. Sometimes you had to check for worms, like, you just bite in it and just see, like, maybe if there were worms, maybe if there weren't. Usually there weren't. Every once in a while you get lucky and have a worm, so some extra protein, I guess. And that was one big fruit. When I got there, the church was called the El Salvador Santa Ana Mission. And when after, probably about a year into my mission, they gave the 2 states closest to them to the other mission, and they, shortened our mission, and they named it the El Salvador Santa Ana Belize mission, because, they moved the church's offices the mission's offices to Santa Ana. And so we had those 3 states, and then the country of Belize. And so it's pretty small, relatively small. Keep in mind, probably the whole country of El Salvador is probably 10 times smaller than the state of Utah. So pretty small, definitely small. And so we had just like 3 states in there. So you could definitely drive around our mission in, probably I would say maybe 3 to 4 hours. So it's small. And so the mission was like that. And after I had gotten home, they had told me that they had changed the mission again. So they, cut off even a little bit more of it, and they changed what was the East mission. They changed it, and they put in another mission in between our missions, and they called that mission the El Salvador San Salvador Belize mission. And so they got Belize, and let's see, part of the state of Sonsonate, they kind of cut it in half, and so our mission got even that much smaller. So the mission president was in charge of half of the state of Sonsonate, Santa Ana, and Ahuachapan. So just like this little tiny space, and we didn't have Belize anymore. And so that was interesting. So there's 3 different missions inside, this tiny country, which may seem, kind of a little extensive, but I think once you see that, you see, first of all, the population as well as the church down there. It's so large and is growing so quickly that many missionaries down there can only be beneficial. So that was definitely something that's great about that. It gets me excited because the work is continuing. More missions are forming in that small country, however small it might be. Also that these millions of people that live there will be able to experience the gospel down there. So that's how the mission has changed. It's evolved, and it's kind of confusing. So those missions, all 3 of them, I'm sure they're great. I've served in parts of some of them. I guess I can kind of brag about that. I've served in what are now different missions. So yeah, it was Santa Ana Belize, but then they just changed it to Santa Ana because Belize is a pretty big country, but the church isn't as strong there. So at a time we have probably around, like, I would say 20 to 30 missionaries, I think. And it's an English mission. So they speak English up in Belize, or what's I think referred to as Creole, which is a very relaxed form of English, something that maybe everyone that speaks English might not understand because it's so relaxed. I never learned how to speak it. I thought it was crazy. And so that was the experience up there, and I think it was almost completely different than El Salvador from what I've heard. I've had a few friends that went up there, and really nice culture, definitely really different in that sense, but yeah, the church is growing there, and I think the presence in Belize has been, as far as the church's presence in Belize, has been a little bit like spread out, I would say, because actually Belize has been handed from different mission to mission, and I think mainly just the reason is because of transportation. And I think the reason why what is now the El Salvador San Salvador mission, or the central mission, they have that because of the international airport that San Salvador has in the capital. And as far as I understand, someone told me that just because of the airport that we have, it's easy to transport missionaries there. So that's why, El Salvador has Belize. So it was one of my areas in particular, and actually it was when I was companions with Mark, who you've interviewed before. We had just gotten out of just a zone conference, and so we, had learned a lot of new things that we could try as far as missionary work goes, because we hadn't had too much success. And so we got back to our area. It was maybe around 6 or 7 in the evening, and usually the sun goes down around 7 o'clock in the evening. And we were there. We had appointments lined up of people that we had contacted. We were ready to go, and we go, and lo and behold, all of our contacts, they just weren't available, or they just fell through. And so we were both feeling a little bit frustrated, a little bit downhearted, because there wasn't, really anything for us to do. And so we had previously printed out a list of the just the records of the ward, and there were some names on there that we didn't know. Actually, there were a lot of names that we didn't know, of people that could potentially be less active and things like that. And we needed to do something. So we were getting a little bit desperate. It was a time when we were getting desperate as far as the work goes. And so we just kind of sat down after trying to find people. We kind of just sat down and we opened up the list, the piece of paper. We were just sitting on the curb, and we were both just kind of sitting there thinking a little bit to ourselves. But I think we were both thinking the same thing. We were both thinking just what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We need to find somebody. And so my companion, he whipped out, he whipped out this list, and he just was looking down straight at it. And while I was just kind of thinking, what could we do? And he looked at the list, and he's like, okay, I have selected someone from the list, and I want you to find someone from the list, and we can just go from there, be guided by the Spirit. And I was like, oh, good idea. So I was just looking at the list of these names of people that we didn't recognize, and that we had addresses for. And I was looking, and I remember specifically looking, and I saw 2 names in particular. I saw one, and I saw one. The very first one that I saw was someone who was his name was Kevin, and I felt an impression for it, but I definitely did want to not immediately exclude all of my other options. And so I was looking down the list, and I found a different name, and I was like, oh, there's a name that we can do. But after looking at that second name, I thought to myself, do you know what? I probably should just follow my first impression, and we can definitely use that. And so I looked at my companion, and I pointed to the name that I selected. And he just looks at me, he's like, I picked that name too. And it was a list of, at least 20 names. And so I thought that was something that was definitely significant. And so we're just like, let's go. So we went, and we were looking for it. And it just so happens that the where we were looking happened to be directly across the street from one of the members in the ward, who was a really strong member. And so we asked her, and she let us know. She's like, I think it's that one. And it was just this gate, just a gate, and it was kind of a pathway from a gate, and there were other houses, along this street. And we go up to the gate, and a few dogs just come up, start barking at us like they want to tear us apart. That's one common thing, is that dogs love missionaries. They like to, hunt them down. Anyway, so we go up there, and we say, hello, we're looking for Kevin. Is he here? And they're just like, yeah, he's here. They go and get him, and we're like, can we come in and talk to you? Because we have your name on our list, and we have here registered that you were once baptized into the church. So he actually was a youth of, I would say, maybe 15 or 16, and he was like, oh yeah, come in. And so we come in, and we find, after speaking with him, we learned that he was baptized when he was younger, and his mother was, I think, also a name on the list, like associated with that name. And we started talking, and we found out that his mother was baptized in the church when she was fairly young as well. well, along with her son, and so we just started talking with his mom as well, and it turns out that she, when she was baptized, she was, kind of alone, and it was a difficult time in her life, and she just remembers that the church definitely was something that had helped her out in her life. And since then, she had remarried, and she had a few children, and we asked her if she didn't mind, if she didn't mind telling us why she left the church. And she, after a second of thinking, she just looked up and she was like, I have no idea why, because all of my memories that I have of the church are good ones, really good. And that's where we really, we found just this family, and, the husband didn't know the church all that well, and some of the children either. And we were able to find this family from just like this impression, and we talked with them for a while, and they were eventually baptized. The entire family was. And so that was, for me, that was one of my favorite stories, is because the Lord definitely spoke to us. I mean, I honestly think that had we not, relied on the Lord in that sense, it would have been much later, if at all. If we, had been going down the list, we would have found this family, these people that had definitely been prepared to receive the gospel. And so that was something that definitely was impactful for me. It was a learning experience for me, because we can always just rely on the Spirit in that sense. And it can be difficult sometimes, and I think sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish your thoughts from the Spirit's, but I think often they're one and the same. And if it's something that's really good, then it's, why not kind of thing. It's just the Spirit would be testifying to you. So that was a really cool experience that I had, something that definitely impacted me. I think the first thing that you can definitely start thinking about is just really focus on being a really great missionary. And I say that not only just because a lot of people say that, but I say it because I think a common feeling among missionaries is that they have just this feeling of inadequacy. And I think it's very important to dispel that, because it really isn't effective at all if you're worrying the entire time of whether or not you're a good missionary, because the Lord has called you to Santa Ana for a particular reason, and He knows that who you are right now, what you're capable of, is definitely sufficient. Of course, the Savior will definitely, help you and help you learn and grow, but what you are and who you are right now is definitely sufficient for at least one person, if not many, in El Salvador, that you can definitely bless the lives of others. So I think that's my first main piece of advice, is don't worry so much about whether or not you're a good missionary. Use that energy for other things. That's one really big piece of advice. And another would be just to not be afraid to open your mouth. I think that was one thing that I might have had a difficult time with, especially since I was trying to learn Spanish. It was a very difficult language for me. But once you do that, once you kind of get past that point of being afraid, I don't know what to say, I'll probably say something dumb, that I don't think really matters all that much. First of all, because the people of El Salvador, they understand that you're learning Spanish, and they will be very understanding, and they will be very loving. Even though you say something dumb, they won't be too harsh on you. Maybe in other areas, it might be frustrating when you're trying to speak to someone that can't really speak English very well. You might get frustrated, but they don't. And so I think that would be one thing. Just open your mouth, and if you don't know something, you can ask. that was one thing. You ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help, or ask how to say something in Spanish or whatever, and to really focus on the people. I think that's one important thing as well, just to really focus on who you're teaching and what you're telling them, because you're telling them the steps on how to really gain eternal life. And so that's very, very important. And as you're calling as a missionary, I know I'm going through a lot of topics here, but one thing in particular is that name badge means a lot more to a lot of people who have experienced it. And when I say that, it's just people who have interacted with the missionaries and have been converted through the help of the missionaries. And so it's something that is extremely sacred. And so I think that being representatives of Jesus Christ, you always have to remember that, and to remember why you're there, and to always keep in your mind somewhere the importance of your calling and the sacredness of it, and to remember that you're not there as whoever you are. You're there as elder so-and-so or sister so-and-so, which is extremely important, because you're definitely a servant of the Lord. And I would like to just share my testimony of it. I know that this work is the work of God, and that this calling is a sacred one, and that the Lord has entrusted you to help His other sheep. He's trusted you to become an aid in His work, and that in itself is something that is very important, and something that should be treated with great respect. And I know that if you put all of your heart into it, no matter how inadequate you might feel, or perhaps how unprepared you might feel, which is kind of a common thing among missionaries, but if you really do that and focus on just really doing your very best, then the Lord will definitely reward you accordingly. And I'm grateful for my 2 years as a missionary. I know that it strengthened me, made me a better person who I am. So definitely be excited for it. And I testify that it's the truth, and that you're there to help out many, many people. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
When I finally got to the mission, I had no clue what was going on. I thought I was doing really well with my 6 weeks in the MTC. But honestly, I did not understand what anyone was telling me. I was so clueless, and I would just sit in all the lessons and lunches with the members, and I had no idea what was going on. I would just keep quiet, which is really funny because I don't normally do that. And people would tell me, why doesn't she talk? And my companion would be like, I don't know, why doesn't she talk? And so I would practice. What I would do is, I was so embarrassed that I would mess something up, I wouldn't I'd only put my little part in for the investigators, and then with the members I probably wouldn't really say anything, but then with my companion I would practice all the Spanish that I could, because I was like, if I make mistakes, I can do it in front of her. And that's kind of what I did, and maybe that wasn't the smartest thing. I should have probably been speaking a lot more Spanish with the members and with the investigators, but I guess that was just kind of me being shy. And so, but I started getting it. And I remember when I got it for the first time, I walked out of the lesson, I was like, Hermana, I understood everything that just happened in that lesson. She's like, really? I think it just took off from there. And so I think that Spanish is kind of an example of everything else that I was getting adjusted to, being a missionary, understanding the culture. So I think the training, as soon as I was getting to that training, I just kind of felt like everything flew. The mission Santa Ana is really small. It's actually the smallest mission in all of Central America. And so you will probably get to know about 85% of all the missionaries if they don't go home a couple changes after you get there. I served outside of the city Santa Ana, my whole mission. I went to, I started in Oachapan in Ausoles Uno, and then I went to El Progreso in Huayua, and then I went to Turin. And then I finished those 3 areas, and then I finished in my last 2 changes in Santa Ana, in El Centro. And so, you're actually going to be surprised how many people are members and how many, everybody knows the Mormons. You'd think that that's not everybody really knows. Basically, almost all the doors you're going to knock on, they're going to know who you are. They probably have some misconceptions on what we believe, but they know who the Mormons are. For religion, everybody believes in Christ. I counted how many atheists I met on my whole mission, and I can promise you I've only met 5 atheists. So everybody is Christian down there. They just have 2 lines. They are Catholics, or they call themselves evangelicos, but that's just basically all the Christian churches. But that's how they're going to introduce themselves to you. They'll say evangelicos. And then there's a small percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses. And normally people will place us and the Jehovah's Witnesses in a group and will say we don't like that. But you'll get a lot of people that say, yeah, come on in. I mean, I'm Catholic, but I will listen, And so you just have to, work with that. And then it depends in each area whether knocking on doors works. Because there's some areas where everybody will let you in. There's some areas where they'll let you in, but they don't want you to come back. And there's areas they just don't let you in. So it really depends on your area about knocking on doors. But it is a knocking on door mission. But honestly, the best thing, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't matter where you serve, member references is the best. Because I can promise you most of the success that I've seen regarding baptisms has been due to member references. So working with members really helps. The temple is outside of our mission, and the rules were changed as I was leaving, that we weren't allowed to go to the temple except for when we go home. So missionaries there will spend their whole mission until the very end, there's special permission to be able to go to the temple. The weather is really, really, really hot. And then it gets to rainy season. It's really rainy. It rains, just pours, like tropical storms. That's just a typical. But if it doesn't rain enough, it's really hot still. So it gets really humid. But there is a certain area of the mission. There are specifically 4, if I remember correctly, areas that are cold. And that would be Los Naranjos, which is really freezing, and Apaneca is really freezing. And then there's Huayua and Ataco, and that's cold, but it's not freezing. It gets really bad in November and December, which is when I was in Huayua. I had to pull out my leather jacket at night for those 2 months because it got pretty cold. So when it suggests that you bring a sweater, you should definitely bring a sweater, at least 2, just in case you end up in one of those areas. The transportation depends where you're at. If you're in the city, your transportation is buses, and you just have to figure out all those routes. And I never learned those routes because of my time that I was there. But if you spend a lot of time in Santa Ana, you'll figure out the routes pretty nicely. Outside of the city, they use what's called mototaxis. So they're taxis, and they're red and 3-wheeled, and you just kind of flag them down, and they'll just take you wherever you want. You're going to find that a lot of stores, like a lot of houses, are stores. They have 2 parts of the door. One's the metal frame, and the other part's the metal door. You can open the metal door, and then you still have that metal frame with the bars. And you can look into their house and see all the things that they're selling. It's normally the basics that they that people need. You're going to find toilet paper normally. A lot of, like, everybody eats beans, so you're going to find bags of beans. And if anything, they have candy and chips. Chips is a huge thing down there. They have different varieties that I've never seen before. And so that's really the typical thing, but on P days we go to Super Selectos, which is kind of like it's a grocery store basically. And we can go to other stores, and so there are actual shopping places, although we can't go to malls. Most people, when you hear about El Salvador, and I knew I heard it a lot before I left, is definitely the crime in El Salvador and the danger. And it's probably just due to all the gangs that are down there, but I can definitely reassure that the Santa Ana Mission is the safest out of the 3 missions in El Salvador. I was never robbed. Nothing ever really happened to me. And there are gangs. You're going to see them. They'll be there, but they don't really touch missionaries because they know what we're there for. We have certain areas we can't go at night of our proselyting area, and in certain areas there's parts that we can't knock on doors. And so there's those precautions already taken for us, and then there's always just listening to the Holy Spirit. He's going to guide us and let us know if we shouldn't go down a certain path, and I've had those. It says don't go there, and we just don't go there. We don't know what would have happened, but we don't need to know. So honestly, when it comes to danger, there's not really something I would worry about too much. The occasional robbing happens, but nothing is ever, to a sister missionary, I've never heard of it. And it doesn't happen often, and, well, nothing's, like, a missionary hasn't been harmed from it. They just take your money and they go. So it's not really something that I would worry about if you're really doing what you need to be doing. And, you know, normally they're pretty chill. They'll just stand there. They'll observe you if you're walking to their territory, but they really won't do anything. I think most of the concern, because it's not saying that El Salvador's not dangerous, it's just not really dangerous for missionaries. Something that's probably interesting is that it's more dangerous for young men than it is for women, and that's due to the gangs. And so people that aren't missionaries, if there's a young man that crosses into another territory and that gang that's in that territory does not know them, they'll assume that they're from a rival gang. And so that's when there's problems. And so it's very common that young men are not allowed to cross from one territory to another if they are not known, which they normally know that and they abide by that. The members definitely do, and we just have to be okay with that. I've had a few times to leave with someone to visit investigators with us, and they were unable to just due to the fact it was a change of territory. And for women, they don't normally do anything. So there's some really interesting things about holidays, about the culture, which is, it's kind of fun. It's interesting. Christmas is fireworks. So they will light fireworks for Christmas, and it's like New Year's, basically. They do have like some kind of like Christmas traditions. They really, that's when the Catholic Church is really doing their parades, and everybody goes to the Catholic Church if they're Catholic, and there's a lot of the religious things that you're going to see. But within the church, they just kind of have a Christmas party, which is kind of, fun. It's just kind of normal. For Day of the Dead, and that's a big thing down in El Salvador, and it's not really what you would imagine, like what you kind of hear about in Mexico. So what they do is that they go to their cemeteries, and they put tons and tons and tons of flowers. They're normally plastic flowers, actually, or they're paper flowers that have been dipped in wax, so they'll last a long time, and they just cover the whole tomb in these flowers and decorate it. And they just spend the whole day there. They eat lunch, and that's a kind of a culture thing, is that they're not in rows of plots. They are like all over the place. You have to be walking around, you accidentally step on a tomb. It's just like a normal thing. And so people eat lunch. Sometimes they sit on the tombs of their relatives to eat lunch. And people like come, like I was in Hawaii when this happened, and that's a touristy place. There's lots of tourists that come in, and they'll walk through and just see this different way of doing the Day of the Dead. But it's a way to remember their ancestors, and it's a good opportunity as missionaries to talk about the plan of salvation. And that's what kind of we did that day. And then there is Semana Santa. I guess that would be called Holy Week in English. And so that's when the Catholic Church is doing parades. They do also, they do like drawings in the middle of the road. They'll do it made of sawdust. They'll make it out of plants, sand. Like, it's just really, really cool. They're just like images in the middle of the road. And so they'll block it off and cars can't go through. But you can go by and, like, you'll be proselyting and you go by and walk past these really beautiful images that they do. And you'll see lots and lots of parades. For the cultural do's and don'ts, well, I think that's a typical thing. You just eat everything that's on your plate or they get offended. And you're going to find a lot of poor families. And so, you know, you have to eat everything they give you because they don't have a lot. And they normally will give you a lot when they don't have much. And so that's kind of interesting. In the mission manual, it does say don't use slang terms. But in El Salvador, if you don't use slang, they don't really understand what you're saying. Because a lot of them are not, it's starting to get better. The younger generation is educated, but the older people have not been educated. And so if you use the correct words, they won't know what you're saying. You'll have to use certain slang terms, like the Spanish that they use, so that they understand you. You will find a lot of old people who can't read. And so that makes it interesting when teaching them, but not impossible. The difficulty is normally when they don't know how to read, they're not easy to teach because they've never had that discipline, like a classroom discipline. So they don't focus normally, and they a lot of times say, well, I don't understand. That's not with everyone, but that's just a normal thing that I've come across, is that when they don't know how to read, they're more difficult to teach because they're just not used to being in a learning setting. But they're always nice. Like, most people are really, really nice. The cultural thing is that you greet everyone in the street. You will say hi, you will say good morning to everyone. That's just how it is down there anywhere you go. You say hi to everyone, and they will say a phrase, which is very common, that says, que Dios le bendiga. And it just means, may God bless you. And that's a very common phrase they say down there. If you're leaving or if you walk across the street and they're going this way, they'll give you that greeting. And so it's a very generous culture and a very kind culture. Of course, you're always going to find those exceptions, but within the culture, there's this generosity, which is very sweet. And you'll be able to feel that in most people, regardless of what religion they are. So something like really cool that I guess is just like a side note is the national bird of El Salvador is called el toragos. And it's a really, really pretty bird. It's blue and green and orange, and it has like these two tail feathers that just go down, and it's really noticeable. But the cool thing is those birds aren't just in zoos now. They're still in the wild, and I've actually seen them. Not really up close, except for one that someone cut off their tail feathers, which is really sad. But that's a really cool thing you could look forward to seeing wildlife, is there are so many birds, and there's obnoxious loud birds, and certain seasons there's locusts, and they're giant. They're like this big. They don't do anything, but they do hop up sometimes and scare you. Certain areas there's bats. Again, haven't had anything happened to me. In the rainy season, there's lots of toads everywhere. So if you're not scared of toads, it's not a big deal. But I've had lots of companions that don't like toads, and it's kind of funny. And cockroaches is a common thing just because it's humid. You kill them, you get over it. But the cool thing is definitely the birds. They're really obnoxious and loud, but they make cool sounds. Like it's like being in a tropical forest, because I guess that's basically what El Salvador is anyway. But you could see some cool birds. Normally you're just going to find the typical brown ones that make cool sounds, but you will sometimes, rare cases, find entoragos or like other colorful birds. And so that's actually really cool. Food. Oh my goodness, I love Salvadorian food. It is all greasy, and so it's kind of a given for most missionaries. If they're not used to eating greasy food, they will gain weight. That was in my case as well. Their most common dish and what they're most known for is called pupusas. And pupusas is basically you take corn flour, and you make a dough out of it, and you put cheese in it. And that's the basic pupusa. You put cheese in it, and you put it on a pan. And if you want to mix it up, and there's lots and lots of kinds. You can put in beans. They put in something called, they do revueltas, and so that's beans with pig. Although missionaries, we weren't allowed to eat pork, so you just see it from a distance. But they also do crazy ones where they'll put carrots in it. They'll put, there's a garlic one where they mix garlic with cheese. They will do jalapenos. They'll do shrimp. And so there's just this crazy variety of pupusas that are all so good. I love pupusas. So pupusas are really great. And you're going to find pupuserias where they make pupusas like on every corner. Everybody makes pupusas down there because it's how they make their living. And so, like, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to find a pupuseria, and you're going to eat pupusas. There's no way you're going to get through without eating pupusas. And definitely if you're in the towns like I was, you're going to make pupusas at least a few times. They also have el plato típico. So that's like normally, so for breakfast, a typical meal that they would have for breakfast is beans, but it's liquefied with a cream. And it's a cream that's very difficult to find, but it's really good. It's Salvadorian cream. And then they'll do fried plantains, kind of like bananas, and they'll do scrambled eggs. But it's not typical scrambled eggs. It's like with tomatoes and onions and all that stuff, all mixed around. And then if they want to get fancy, they'll do a type of cheese that's white, and then they will have it with tortillas, which is another thing, is their tortillas are really thick. They're probably about like that thick. And they're about this round. And so that's their tortillas. It's not typical. And if they're not eating it with tortillas, they'll eat it with rolls, basically. They call it pan francés. They're just really, really good rolls. So that's a typical breakfast. If it's not a typical breakfast, you just take out the eggs, and it's the same thing, and that's dinner. But it's so good. I love it. They also have street food. And it's honestly really difficult to avoid street food because that's the only food you're going to find unless you want to go to a fancy restaurant. So they do French fries. It's a really common thing down there. They do French fries, and they put cheese on it, and they put the ketchup on it and mayonnaise, and you just eat it out of the bowl like that. They also do yuca, which is a type of root, and they'll fry that, and you put in it salsa with, it's kind of like cabbage and cucumber and all that stuff shredded up, although as missionaries we can't eat that, so we just ate it with the salsa. And then there's another one, it's really, really good. It's called pastelitos. So it's just like they have some kind of dough, I believe it's corn dough, and they'll put meat in it or they'll put potatoes in it. They'll roll it up in a ball, and they'll just fry it. And then you do the same thing, salsa and the shredded vegetables. And, well, I've only tried it with the salsa, but I absolutely love pastelitos. So it's really, really good. Crazy foods, you can find them, but they're not typical. Sometimes they eat iguana down there. I never did. I never had anyone make iguana. It's more expensive, and so you're not really going to see that, but they'll do it. If you go to a fancy restaurant, you might find it, certain ones. And then sometimes they eat possum. But again, I never ate possum, so it's just like something that I heard people would eat. For food stories, I guess the funniest thing is that before my mission, I hated bananas. I absolutely hated bananas. But when I ate a small banana, so it's called a guineo, so it's like a banana, but it's like smaller, I loved it. And it might have been because it was just fresher, but I loved it. And ever since, I have just loved bananas. And speaking of that, there's lots of fruits. You're going to find pineapple, you're going to find mango. Just that there's actually a season, I guess you could call it something about the weather, because there's falling mango everywhere. Every turn you're going to make, unless you're in the city, there's a mango tree. And so when mango season hits, which is about May, believe it starts, and they eat most of these things, they'll eat it green or they'll eat it ripe, or the in-between. They will just eat fruit however it is. But you'll have mango trees that just fall, and you'll actually walk past them. They're just fermenting in the street. Like, it's just ridiculous how many mangoes there are. And then you're going to have a lot of crazy fruit that you've probably never ever seen in your life. There's zapote, there's guindas, there is maracuyá, marañón. Marañón is the fruit that comes from a cashew tree. So you have the fruit, and then you have the cashew, so there's actually a fruit that they eat. Although not everybody really likes the fruit. I do. And you're going to find star fruit down there as well. It's just a plethora of fruit, and it's amazing. Language. Like I said, it was very difficult for me in the beginning to speak Spanish, but I got it down after that really quickly, I believe. And I can definitely just tell you that part of it, and a huge part of it, was reading the Book of Mormon in Spanish. I read it one verse in Spanish, and I read one verse in English, because I would see what I could understand in Spanish, and then whatever I didn't understand, I could read it in English. But then I did that. I read the whole Book of Mormon like that. And everybody can find their own system that works out, but reading the Book of Mormon from the front page to the last page, you will learn the language. We have a promise that we will, and I can attest to that. And the other thing is doing part of what I didn't do is speak it. There's 4 parts of the language. There's the speaking, there's the understanding, there's the reading, and the writing. And those come separately. Although it doesn't sound like it makes sense, it really does. If you want to learn how to speak Spanish, you have to speak it. If you want to learn how to understand Spanish, you have to listen. You have to try to understand. If you want to read it, you got to read it. If you want to write it, you got to write it. And then that's how it goes. Like, the application is how it is. Because there's lots of Hispanic missionaries I met that they understood English perfectly, but they couldn't speak it because they weren't used to speaking it, but they were used to hearing it from their companions. And so it's really, you have to, if you want to speak Spanish, you have to speak it. If you want to understand Spanish, you have to listen. And like I said, there's a lot of slang. So you have to learn the slang, but I really suggest trying to learn the actual word as well, just so that you're not coming back speaking a type of Spanish that no one understands. So have that understand that difference between those, but use what's best for the person to understand. Also, I have met missionaries like this, where they get to the end of their mission, basically, and their Spanish is just so little. And you think, well, why? They spent their whole mission, and then other people go, well, it's just because the Lord didn't give them the gift of tongues. And I guess that's part of it's true. But most of those missionaries that I've met, they got to a certain point, and then they didn't want to try anymore. They said, I speak enough to be understood, and I understand them. And they don't try anymore. They get back, they say the same phrases every day, and they don't try to excel. And they're content where they are. And I think you should never, bash on yourself like, I'm never learning this language. You should obviously, be, amazed by yourself, how much you can speak. But don't ever be content with the amount that you can speak and say that's enough. I know sufficient. It's never enough, because my MTC mission president said we're never going to be as fluent in our second language as our first language. Because how many years do we have experience of speaking English? I have, I think, I can't remember when I started speaking, but I guess we're saying 18 years, 19 years. How many years do I have speaking Spanish? Understandable Spanish, maybe over a year. That's a huge difference. So there's always room for improvement on the language we're learning. And we have to keep trying and keep excelling, even if it's just one word a day. One word a day is 365 words in a year. That's really amazing. And with your grammar, there's complicated grammar in Spanish. Focus on the grammar you want to learn at the time. And when you get that down, try to get more grammar. Focus on present tense. When you get present tense down, get past tense. Then get future tense. And you just go down the line, figuring out those complicated until you get to the complicated grammar. And you will speak very, very good Spanish. Just by taking it at your pace and the way you learn, but always striving for improvement. Because people will learn at different speeds, and that we shouldn't be comparing. We should never compare our Spanish with someone else's Spanish. That's a bad idea. But looking at where our Spanish is and seeing how much more we can improve for ourselves so that we can help the people we're teaching, and so we can be better servants of the Lord. There's lots of common phrases you're going to hear. There's certain ones, and you'll have to learn those, that for other cultures are offensive. So coming back, I had to learn certain phrases that I said, my whole mission, I can't say here because it's offensive. Specifically where I live, there's lots of Mexicans, and the certain phrase I would say all the time is very offensive to Mexicans. And so we have to be conscious of that, the cultural differences too. And as you go, there's missionaries from all over, from different countries as well. And you can ask them, hey, what phrases here are offensive according to your country, and get those understood. But common phrases you're going to hear, especially mission phrases, I guess we could go into that. They're going to say the word baggy. And baggy means, I guess the best English word is chunky. So you're thinking about home, you're thinking about going home. And that's just a common phrase that comes out of everybody's mouth because, every missionary is thinking about home at least one point or another. And on P-Day, you're writing your family. So that phrase will come out a lot. They'll say baggy. There's books that missionaries pass around and people can write and, put down their information for after the mission. And those are also called baggies. I have no clue why that's the same word, but that's what they call baggies. Another missionary term is snake. And that's if someone has a crush on a missionary. They'll say that person is a snake. Or it can go the other way, that maybe they're joking around saying the missionary has a crush on this person. They'll call them a snake. It comes from the English word, but they just spell it different. So that's a common missionary phrase they have down there, that the common person doesn't actually understand. It's just a missionary term. But I guess like other things is like they'll say super pilas, which is like super awesome. Like they just are really great missionaries or really great person, or like if they call an investigator super pilas, it's because this investigator is like golden. They'll say things like se la pica, which is a phrase for Mexicans that is offensive. In El Salvador it is not, and you'll hear it a lot. It just means you're cocky. You're full of it. You're going to hear that a lot amongst missionaries. They'll say se la pica. And then as you go, like you'll start learning things like when a missionary is finishing their mission, they'll say that they're dying. They'll say, está muerto, or está muriendo. And so because of that, their last companion, they say that they kill them. So they say, which is, como they'll say, like someone will say to you, le va a matar, which means like you're going to kill them, which just means that you're their last companion before they go home. But that was just a funny story for me, is that I still understood a little bit of Spanish. My trainer was going home after my training, and so I had people tell that, like, oh, you're going to kill her. And I was like, why would I kill her? I would never kill her. And it was just they were saying that she was finishing her mission with me. And so that's something you might want to learn before you kind of freak out, like I did. Specifically for sister missionaries, bring some shoes, some type of Crocs. You can buy shoes down there, but if you're not in the Santa Ana city, you're not going to find really good ones. And so if you can bring your own pair of shoes that are made of rubber, any kind, you're going to be okay, because there's no way in the rainy season you're getting through without having your feet wet, because the water will come up to your knees sometimes. And so you just get used to getting your clothes wet. If you can get a backpack that is waterproof, it will save your life. Mine was waterproof, and that was very, very helpful. They do, although I believe most missions say that you don't bring backpacks, but you want to bring a backpack. It's a backpack mission. It's a walking mission. We don't have bikes. We just use mototaxis and we use buses, and most of the time you're walking. You will want a backpack, and if you can get it waterproof, it'll save you a lot, because all the missionaries that don't have waterproof backpacks, they put all their scriptures in a plastic bag, because they just know their backpack's gonna get wet. So just live with the fact there's no way you're preventing yourself from getting wet. Even if you use an umbrella, you're gonna get wet. So Crocs or whatever kind of shoes that can be dried the next morning, and waterproof backpack would help a ton. For things you want to bring, you don't actually have to bring that much clothes, because clothes are so cheap in El Salvador. So cheap. Like the most expensive skirt you're going to find that's not expensive is $5. Shirts, you can get shirts for like $1. Like, clothes is not a big deal. You can get tons of clothes. You're gonna want to buy hangers your first P-Day if your house does not have one. And it's kind of common that you won't have hangers, but sometimes you do if there's enough missionaries that left hangers. But just like keep in mind that your first P-Day, you're gonna want to have to buy some things that you don't have, that are just better, just cheaper to buy down there. They do most things you're going to find. What you will not find normally is peanut butter. There is not peanut butter unless you go to Super Selectos, and they're $9. Or Dollar City, where it's a tiny little thing for $2. So if you like peanut butter, maybe that's something you'd want to bring. They don't really have a lot of healthy foods. But you will be able to find, obviously, like I said, fruits, and there's vegetables, like if that's the kind of thing. But like, you're not going to find granola bars for cheap price. You're going to find those kind of things if you really like healthy eating. It's just not common. People don't buy it a lot, and so they don't really sell it, and if they do, it's really expensive. For safety, like I said, they kind of leave the sister missionaries alone, but something you will have to get used to is catcalls. You will probably get catcalls all day, every day. And that's what happened to me, just because you're not from there and they notice you. You stand out because you don't have their color of skin. And that's just how it is. They think that someone that isn't super tan to them is really beautiful. Or they think automatically you're American. And so they want to try to speak English to you, and it's normally offensive if it's not the typical I love you, which you'll probably hear a lot in English. They'll just, when you start understanding Spanish, you'll start understanding what they're saying, and it's not normally nice, but you just get over it. They don't do anything to you. You'll just have to get used to hearing it, because that's just because you don't look like you're from there. And so that's what's going to happen, is you'll just get catcalls. And then even if you look like you could be from there and you're really pretty, you have the name tag, they'll do the same thing. They'll catcall. There's a lot of drunks. Normally they won't do anything to you. Sometimes they'll walk up to you and try to talk to you, but I've never had a drunk try to do something to me. They just want to talk. Because normally the drunks aren't the ones that say nasty things. It's normally the sober guys. The drunks will probably just, the most they'll say is that you're pretty. But normally sometimes they'll ask you to pray for them, or they will ask you questions about the church, or they'll tell you to visit them, or they say they'll go to your church. And often I would just invite them, go ahead, you can go to church, just make sure you go sober. And so like the drunks are kind of easier. They're the ones that are more typically going to speak English to you, sorry. And the other guys will say other things. Get used to it. They're not going to do anything to you. It's just something you just gotta deal with. Health, just obey the health mission rules the best you can. They tell you not to eat strawberries, just don't eat strawberries. I've seen so many girls go home just because they got a parasite, and it was easily prevented because they drank the tap water, or their cook was not cooking to the standard that mission was saying, and normally you know when. And so just, even though a lot of missionaries don't obey certain rules, like don't drink the tap water, if you do, you're better off. If you can filter your water, you're better off. If you can get water, if you can buy water off the street, because it's always going to be in a bottle or a bag, it's better. And you won't have to worry about parasites being in it. If you obey those kind of rules that they have, don't eat, it's called cortido, don't eat the shredded cabbage with all the other vegetables. It's the cabbage that's the problem. Just don't do it. And you are not really likely to get sick. I never got really sick. I did my first Sunday, but I think it was because I was getting used to the food. And I got over it. It was like 2 days. And so I think if you just obey those rules, even though there's people that are, there's even missionaries, they'll say, no, there's no need. You're not going to get sick. Since we're from such a faraway country, our bodies are not accustomed to that way of eating or that way of drinking. Just obey the rules and you'll be just fine, honestly. I have a really cool story, at least I think it's really cool, of an investigator. So it starts off that we were at church, and this woman shows up, and the bishop says, this woman is looking for you. And we're like, we don't know who she is. We go find her, and she's holding a little boy, a baby boy, and she says, I need help. She's like, my husband doesn't have a job, and we're not making by, and this is my last resort. And I was told that the Mormon church can help me. And so we looked for the Relief Society teacher, or the Relief Society president, and she gave them like butter, rice, a few things that she could scramble. And then we set up a time that we could visit her. So we started visiting her, and her house it wasn't a house. It was an abandoned house. There was no roof except for a couple rusted metal sheets. They had no beds. They had no tables, no chairs, nothing. And we started teaching her. And she was doing really well, and we were teaching her, and her husband was in and out. Well, they call husband, sorry. That's another thing. They say husband when it's just boyfriend that's living with them. So her boyfriend would be in and out. And we got to the point where we asked her, like, if she wanted to be baptized. She said, yeah. We were just, like, so amazed. We're like, do you want to go to church? And she was like, I can't. I have to wash clothes because I don't have anything. And then we were like, well, we'll help you. She's like, no, don't help me. We're like, well, if we do it right now, you'll have time to do it, to go to church tomorrow. She's like, well, I don't have any soap. And that's what she admitted to. We said, okay, we're going to see what we can do. And we walked away from her house not knowing what to do because as missionaries, we can't buy them anything. We can't use our mission funds for this. And we walk up to the store, and we remember that the very same day, before we were going up to her house, my companion found $5 on the ground. So we said, we can use the $5. That's not mission funds. And like it's been explained, the El Salvadorian things are really cheap. So we were able to get her diapers. We were able to get her soap to wash her clothes, soap to wash her dishes. We were able to get her lunch, a couple sandwiches, and we even got the little boy a piece of candy. We went back, and we gave her all those things, and we explained to her that it was not from our funds because we weren't allowed to do that, but the miracle that had happened. And so we were able to, the story gets better. We were able to find a different house for them. So they started living in a rest home, taking care of old people, but being able to have electricity, being able to have water, running water, and beds. And so they were getting ready to get married, and it was just funny. The boyfriend was always saying that the shoes didn't fit. We were trying to get him dress shoes. We tried boots, we tried everything, and it was the last day we finally got him shoes so that he could get married. They get married, and the next day we show up to their house to take them to church, and they're fighting. And it was bad. They were fighting like it was over. And she was like, I don't want to do this. I want a divorce. And we were just, no, what is happening? And it was just really, really bad. So she didn't get baptized that following Saturday. But we kept, because of all the things that were happening, we kept visiting her, and she said she wanted to, but she just wanted to take it slower. And before I left the area, I set a baptismal date. I leave, and she did not like my companion. And my companion really didn't go along with her either. And so my companion stopped visiting her, and she didn't want to receive them anyway. And so it was like frustrating. I was in my new area and hearing this news about someone that I really cared about. And then the funny thing is that when my companion from that old area was changed, my companion at that time went there. And so I was able to tell her, if you do anything, can you please start visiting her? And if she wants to be baptized, baptize her. And so the companion of that time went there, and I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later she got baptized. And she later on, I would hear news about them. They got an actual house. She's trying to work things out with her husband, and she's really active in the church. So it was like a really crazy story, but it was a really amazing thing that at the end, it turned out okay. For missionaries that are going to the El Salvador Santa Ana Mission, honestly, love it. Love it, love it, love it. I think before I opened my call, I felt like my heart was prepared for El Salvador. And even though there's many trials, lots of learning experiences, I would never take it back. The best thing you can do is be prepared spiritually, and everything else just kind of goes into place. Work hard. Try to learn the language the best you can. It's going to be a struggle your first months. I could say your first 3 months, or I could say your first 6 months. It depends on who you are. But you will learn the language if you do everything you can. It's so beautiful. Absolutely would love it. You have green trees everywhere, fresh air. I guess if you're in the city, a little bit less fresh air. But like if you have to do any traveling, you have to go through tons and tons of just forest, rainforest. And it's so beautiful. So, so beautiful. And there's flowers of every kind. Those tropical flowers that you see on the internet, you're like, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if that's really real. They exist, and they're really cool, and they're down there. Absolutely amazing. It's just lots of green, and then you see colors of all kinds, and people put them in their houses. And the houses are painted different bright colors because people do what they want down there. And it's really cool. And like I said, the people are very generous. It's a very, very generous. The members are very generous. And they love missionaries. They love, love, love missionaries. Normally. I obviously can't say that's everyone. But it's to that point, like if you don't say goodbye before changing areas, they get super offended that you didn't say goodbye to them. And that's a typical thing. I've seen that in all my areas where they get upset, like, why didn't this missionary say goodbye to me? And I think that's just due to the fact that they just love missionaries. They love them, and they know that they need them so much. The church is still so young in El Salvador that they really lean on the missionaries for a lot of things still. I guess you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you will always find in every area those families and those individuals that you really care about and you really love. And it makes it hard to say goodbye. But if you're searching for miracles, you will find them. Even if they're small ones, you will find miracles. And don't expect giant ones. Don't expect someone to say yes to baptism their first visit. Because it's a real world still. They still need time. They still need to feel it in their heart. You can get the first visit, they say yes. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but don't be expecting it. But look for the miracles. Look for the things they understand in those lessons. Look for the generosity. Look for the things while you're walking and you decide to contact someone and they actually give you their address and it's real. And they're actually there when you go there. So it's look for those miracles. And don't ever take them for granted. Because sometimes you really need them when you have a bad day. And you'll have bad days. If you have bad days in life, you're going to have worse days as a missionary. Because you care. You care so much. If you care about those people, you're going to get heartbreaks sometimes. But the miracles that can happen outweigh those heartbreaks by a million. Because you're going to get both if you really do what you're supposed to do. If you really focus on the Lord and focus on those people, you will see the miracles. And you will remember those hardships as a learning experience, as moments that the Lord was trying to make you something better. And take advantage not just of the Spanish you can learn, but the gospel. I cannot tell you how much I've learned. There's basic things that we taught in lessons every time that I didn't know before my mission. Or it made sense, but I didn't really think about it. Take advantage of that. Every every morning you're going to be studying. Take advantage of what you can learn. Dig into the Book of Mormon and like take advantage of the fact that you have like the Spirit 1,000 times plus what you did before you were on your mission, which means you're going to understand so much more than you did before. And take advantage just of all the gospel things you can learn. You'll understand that you probably knew a lot like before your mission, like 1% of what, maybe less than that, of what there really is for you to learn. And I've just learned so much just taking advantage of those days and learning things and sharing them with my companion, and my companion's sharing something back that's like, whoa, or like having that perfect lesson for an investigator. You're going to have those crazy moments that are just amazing, even if they're really simple. Well, I just want to say to everybody that's seeing this video, if you're going on a mission, good luck. I hope you the best. Just do everything you can. For those that have their missions, and I'm getting in that boat, I know we can do this and that we can get through life and know what the Lord still has for us. And for everybody else, if I know you, I love you. If I don't, I bet you're still a really awesome person. And I hope that you receive all the blessings that the Lord has for you.